With 2019 facing downward pressures and uncertainties for sustainable and reliable development, more expectations are emerging on the impact of new vitality and the transformation of the Asian economic engine. What potential can be reached by enhancing regional integration and coordination? And what are the top priorities for Asia and the world at large to achieve sustainable development from the UN's perspective? To discuss the many issues related to Asian integration and more, I'm very happy to be joined here by His Excellency Mr. Liu Zhenmin and the Secretary General of the United Nations at the Broad Forum for Asia. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Today we are very happy to be joined here by His Excellency Mr. Liu Zhenmin and the Secretary General for Social and Economic Development. Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you, Yang Rui. I'm honored to join you again for the dialogue.
Well, this show promises to be a very enlightening and insightful one, given your rich experiences not only with diplomacy in China, but also your public service in the United Nations. The issue, first of all, is how do you look at challenges facing regional integration in Asia? Because this is a broad forum for Asia, so regional development and further integration as well as innovation will of course be the driving force for the prospects of Asia.
This time I'm coming back to the Broad Forum for Asia, actually mainly for the promotion of the 2030 agenda in the region. Of course, for the achievement of the 2030 agenda, in addition to promoting the global international cooperation, we're also promoting a regional cooperation. For Asia, this region, so far there have been no pan-Asian cooperation mechanism. But I think over the past decade, Asian cooperation has been developing, which has been contributed to the economic growth and economic social development of the region tremendously. But this region, due to its composition of the countries in the region, I think has been important for the past decade to promote the regional economic cooperation with ASEAN at center. So ASEAN centrality, supporting ASEAN centrality in the regional cooperation has been one of the guiding principles for the region. At the same time, I think to promoting both dialogue and the cooperation has been always on the two pillars for the regional countries. So it's for the East Asian cooperation, there's a great achievement in the area for economic and social development. But of course, there's still both the challenge and the potential to achieve cooperation on the issue of regional security.
But what is the blueprint for your 2030 vision? I mean, tell me more about the vision of 2030. Do you have any serious obstacles in the execution of 2030?
Of course, I think the 2030 agenda for sustainable development was agreed and adopted by the world leaders in 2015. This agenda for the all 193 members of the UN. But 4 years has been passed. Progress in advancement and in implementation is not very pleasant, because I think the progress has been achieved in some regions, on some SDGs, like for Asia Pacific. I think most important achievement in this region in implementing SDGs is to be quality education. So I think among 17 SDGs, Asia has been made tremendous progress in quality education. There, you will see that's why the Asian students have been very promising in their competition, even in globally, even in Western schools in Europe and in North America. At the same time, I think there will be also good progress in Asia in terms of eradication of poverty, especially in East Asia, including China. But there are still tremendous challenges. So I think the most difficult in achieving 2030 agenda is still issue whether and how the world could maintain a steady economic growth.
Despite the glow of the rise of Asian hemisphere, in the words of Keshu Mahbubani, a scholar from Singapore, for example, Asia is known for having different levels of economic development,
yes,
ethnic and cultural diversity. We have so many different languages when we come to the issue of communication. And therefore, is it easy job to promote regional integration? You take ASEAN centrality as one of the major principles in advancing such regional cooperation. But I believe, as you said, it's a difficult job. Tell us more about the adversity of your execution.
Actually, you see, the Asian reality is composed not only the small and medium-sized countries, but also some big ones, like China, India, Japan, and Russia, and they have a very strong presence and influence of the United States, the largest superpower in the world. That's why that determines that for the Asia regional cooperation, we have to support this process with ASEAN at the center. So only when we could have the ensure ASEAN centrality in leading the Asia regional cooperation, I think we can achieve the objective. This helps because to avoid kind of competition or confrontation between among major powers. I think the diversity of the Asian region determines that we have to support East Asia regional cooperation or East Asia regional integration with ASEAN centrality.
Chinese leadership says loud and clear that we welcome competition so long as they are benevolent, constructive, instead of being hostile.
Yeah.
Now, do you think the growing presence of major powers outside this region of Asia has further complicated our goodwill of having constructive dialogue and win-win cooperation?
Actually, you see around the world, Asia, this is the only region still have legacies from the Cold War, like Korean Peninsula. The North and South Korea still divided. And if you look at Southeast Asia, for the Southeast Asian countries, they have achieved the regional peace and stability only after the end of the Cold War and only after the end of the Cambodia conflict. So that's where we are encouraging. I think in my previous capacity in the Chinese Foreign Ministry, are we talking with our ASEAN colleagues that for the ASEAN countries, it's important for them to cherish this legacy.
There's no question for the consensus building principle of ASEAN as a very successful and promising regional bloc.
Yes.
Despite our readiness to be so supportive of ASEAN centrality, we've had this mechanism of a 10+3, meaning ASEAN 10 plus China, Japan, and South Korea.
Yes.
What about the response from Japan and South Korea towards what you call the ASEAN centrality? Do these two governments also buy the idea of being supportive of such centrality?
I think in view of the reality in East Asia, even among China, Japan, and ROK trilateral cooperation, there are also consensus that they need to support the ASEAN centrality in the East Asia cooperation. But of course, whether and how the East Asia cooperation could be further integrated and further strengthened also depending on the collective support of the trilateral partners of the China, Japan, ROK. because these three countries, they are the big economies in the region. Only when these three countries, China, Japan, ROK, could work together, not only among themselves, among the three, but also to support ASEAN plus 3 cooperation, I think the East Asia cooperation or the East Asia regional economic integration would have a bright future.
Asia is not only about regional integration. Specifically, it is about geopolitical and geoeconomic competition, if not rivalries.
Yeah.
Let's look at India. What do you think of, say, the role that India could play? India has been known for being part of the leadership of a non-aligned movement. Do you think India, out of reason for global integration, has somehow sacrificed part of the principle it has adhered to since the Cold War?
Actually, India is an important country. As one of the largest country in South Asia, they have a very influential role in the South Asian region. You know, when we are talking about Asian regional cooperation, it will be Asia divided into different sub-regional groups. Now, I think for South Asia, although they have a so-called SAC, South Asian Cooperation Association, but I think their economic integration has been very slow because the differences among the sub-regional members. I think for the recent initiative, the Indian Pacific initiative, by some major powers from within and outside the region, actually they are informal. I think, of course, it's difficult to expect what their political purpose is, but I don't think they are going to have a direct impact on the regional cooperation of the East Asian countries. So that's why I think that also signifies the hidden debt that we should continue to support the Asian regional cooperation with ASEAN at the center. You know, I think ASEAN countries have been never taken a position on that, the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, because that would be really complicate the Asian regional cooperation.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Liu Zhenmin, Under-Secretary General for Social and Economic Development. We are addressing issues like regional integration, with ASEAN being one of the pillars to guarantee regional prosperity and inclusiveness. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Mr. Liu.
Thank you.
Would you elaborate a bit the implications of advancing the Mekong sub-regional coordination between China and some member states of ASEAN, like Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and Myanmar?
Actually, you know, within the 10 ASEAN members, actually, there are 5 countries. They are riparian countries along the Mekong River. China and the 5 ASEAN countries, they are sharing the same river, linked by the same river. I think they could be the so-called continental ASEAN members. I think geographically, they are very close to China. 3 out of these 5 countries, they have a common boundary with China. That's why I think it's quite natural that for China and for these 5 countries to develop kind of a new mechanism, so-called Lancang-Mekong cooperation. But this Lancang-Mekong cooperation is not intended to compete with China-ASEAN cooperation, but it's to complement. It is a part of the supplementary mechanism to the China-ASEAN cooperation. Actually, within the UN system, we see around the world there are many regional and sub-regional corporations. So the for all these mechanisms, including Land-China Mekong Cooperation, I think they could make good use of their geographical advantages to ensure that these countries could benefit from sub-regional cooperation economically and socially, including jointly preserve and utilize the river itself, Mekong River itself.
I'd like to have your thoughts about code of conduct in South China Sea. China deserves credit for its successful diplomacy in ironing out the differences or in putting aside differences while we look into the future by building a community of shared future. However, we have some claimants who are involved in the maritime disputes. Are you optimistic that with the help of international community and the promise and blessing of COC, maritime disputes are likely to be solved in the spirit of, for example, of finding a solution to the land border disputes between Vietnam and China? We have also fixed the problem of maritime disputes in the Beibu Gulf between Vietnam and China. Do you think this kind of a successful license can be copied elsewhere for finding a solution to the maritime disputes in the South China Sea?
Definitely. Promoting peaceful settlement disputes and promoting international cooperation, these are two basic principles of the UN Charter. So I think for the regional countries, whether they're ASEAN members or China and others, it's important for them that they could resolve their differences and disputes through negotiations and consultations. So whether you call it COC or DOC, it was intended also to consolidate outcome of their agreement on settlement disputes, as well as to build up kind of framework for the continued cooperation in the region. Actually, I'm quite optimistic. In my previous capacity, I think I promoted that process. Now, since I left the foreign ministry a year and 7 months ago, I think I'm still optimistic. I think they will make good progress, and they will complete the consultation within the coming years.
We've been discussing the issue of a sub-regional cooperation, and a second look at this interesting idea. We have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on our radar, and this has a lot to do with the future of Euro-Asian continent. What do you think of the possibility that we're going to have a perfect harmony between President Putin's Euro-Asian Economic Union and President Xi Jinping's vision for Belt and Road Initiative?
I think actually for Asia and Europe, they are really interconnected. They share the same continent. And so it's important for both Asian countries, European countries, especially East European and Central Asian countries, they develop kind of regional cooperation mechanism.
The so-called 16+1 regional cooperation between China and those member states.
16+1, that means the 16 East and Central Asian European countries with China. But I think what you mentioned how the Central Asian countries plus Russia and could improve their collaboration with China and with the East Asian countries. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization is intended to improve and build up kind of mechanism of cooperation in that region. It proved to be very successful. I think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also expanding its membership and also expanding its area of cooperation. Especially the last summit community in Qingdao has been proved very successful. So, for the United Nations, in view, not only in view of the history, but also in view of the current reality of the world, I think be promoting different kinds of regional cooperation still is one of our objectives. So that's why, especially in the current circumstances, the globalization, multilateralism, and the challenge and the threat. So we need to continue to vigorously encourage and promote the regional cooperation. Because regional multilateralism will definitely contribute to the global multilateralism.
Despite all the merits concerning the dynamic process of globalization, ironically, we seem to be witnessing the opposite trend of deglobalization with the rise of populism, protectionism, and unilateralism. How difficult is this kind of a new trend? I mean, how difficult is it for you working for social and economic development on the platform of the United Nations to fight or push back the trend of deglobalization in an era of post-truth, post-West, post-order? I mean, these novel ideas have actually been created by the Western media and scholars.
Actually, you know, the globalization has been emerged only before the Cold War, before the end of the Cold War, but accelerated after the end of the Cold War. But this round of globalization has been actually taken place in overall international structure, international order created after the end of the Second World War. So both the Europeans and North Americans, actually, they played a central role in creating this international system. And they also played a central role in leading the globalization. So it's a pity that after 20 years of a rapid development of globalization, I think some group of people, they are now joined the kind of a movement for anti-globalization. But now we can see there's a retreat from globalization. But this is not the policy of the many governments. Even for some governments, they may have decided to withdraw from a few international agreements with one or two international organizations, including Paris Agreement, or including the Global Compact on Migration. But that doesn't mean that they have been stayed away from the globalization. So I think this is we could interpret that this globalization really under challenge, under threat. But there is still tremendous room and potential to revitalize the globalization. The reason for this anti-globalization movement that emerged because of many people. Some people say that the past 2 decades of globalization have been not so inclusive, not so fair, and not so sustainable. So now I think in the UN we started talking how to promote and advance a globalization which could be inclusive, fair, sustainable globalization, to ensure that all people would have benefited from the globalization.
Development has been prioritized on the agenda, for example, of Mr. Kofi Annan, former General Secretary of the United Nations. Poverty alleviation remains a major piece on the agenda of the United Nations. However, funding proves to be very difficult. You have private investment in mega projects. You also have investment inevitably in public service. In the second case, it's not easy to generate easy return of the investment. So what do you make of the challenges that you face in collecting funds to support your projects?
I think every country has taken eradication of poverty as a top priority, including the Chinese government. We appreciate the Chinese government has made tremendous progress in that area, and appreciate the Chinese government decided and declared to complete eradication of poverty by 2020. This would set a good example for the world. But unfortunately, globally speaking, eradication of poverty still have a long way to go. For example, Africa, based on our forecast of my department, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for the majority of African countries, the eradication of poverty will depend on whether they could maintain double-digit economic growth and a continued decline of inequality in the next decade. It means to be eradication of poverty will depend on economic growth. But for economic growth, also depending how we could finance the development. So actually, in experience of Chinese government and some other governments, 100% eradication of poverty will not be achieved purely or solely through the economic growth. So each country needs to have a sound social protection system.
Thank you very much. As the second biggest economy and one of the P5 of the UN Security Council, there's much for China to do in enhancing the South-South cooperation, and particularly in our assistance with the massive industrialization of countries in the Sub-Sahara region. And in fact, President Xi Jinping has reached an agreement with African politicians about our investment in the construction of a Belt and Road Initiative, particularly infrastructure in these countries. Our dialogue with Mr. Liu Zhenmin, Under-Secretary General for Social and Economic Development of the United Nations, has shed some light on this wide margin where all countries should join hands in advancing the agenda of cutting poverty as well as advancing social progress. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.